The grand ballroom of Bellwood Estate fell silent. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on a single figure standing before the Steinway grand piano. The crystal chandeliers above cast dancing shadows across the polished ebony surface, but none of that mattered now. All that existed was this moment, this man, and the instrument that had changed everything. Darius Coleman stood there, his calloused hands hovering over the keys. Hands that had spent decades pushing mops, scrubbing floors, and emptying trash bins. Hands that society had deemed useful only for menial labor. Yet here he was, in a $1,000 borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders, about to do the impossible. The whispers had already started. A janitor, playing at a charity gala. What kind of joke was this? Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged knowing glances, already preparing their polite excuses for when this inevitable disaster concluded. In the front row, Harrison Whitfield, one of the country's most celebrated concert pianists, sat with his arms crossed, a thin smile playing at his lips. This would be entertaining at least. But how did Darius get here? How does a man who cleans toilets for a living end up center stage at the most prestigious social event of the season to understand that we need to go back? Back 3 months to a night that would change everything. Back to when Darius Coleman was just another invisible face in a world that had long ago stopped seeing people like him. This is that story. And it begins, as all great transformations do, with a single moment of curiosity in the darkness. Darius Coleman had been invisible for so long, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. At 43 years old, he'd perfected the art of moving through spaces without being noticed. It was a survival skill, really. In the homes of the wealthy people like Darius existed in a strange, liminal state. Present, but not present. Necessary, but forgettable. He would enter rooms and conversations would continue as if he weren't there. He'd heard things, personal things, things that would make most people uncomfortable. But Darius had learned long ago to become part of the furniture. Bellwood Estate was his latest assignment, though calling it an assignment made it sound more prestigious than it was. He was the night janitor, which meant he arrived after the family had retired and left before they woke. He cleaned the marble floors that stretched like frozen lakes through the mansion. He polished the banisters that curved up staircases he'd never have reason to climb. He emptied wastebaskets full of discarded luxury things people threw away that cost more than his monthly rent. The estate belonged to the Pemberton family old money that went back generations. Mrs. Victoria Pemberton was the current matriarch, a woman in her 60s, who carried herself with the kind of elegance that only comes from never having worried about money. Darius had seen her exactly 3 times in the 2 months he'd worked there, and each time she'd looked through him as if he were made of glass. He didn't mind. Invisibility had its advantages. It meant no one bothered him. No one made small talk he'd have to reciprocate. No one asked questions about his life that he'd have to answer with polite lies. He could do his work, collect his paycheck, and go home to his small apartment where the walls were thin and the heat was temperamental, but it was his. Most nights followed the same routine. Darius would arrive at 10 p.m. after the estate had settled into its evening quiet. He'd start in the kitchen, working his way through the public rooms, then finish in the grand ballroom, where the Pembertons occasionally hosted events. The ballroom was Darius's favorite room, though he'd never admitted it to anyone. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place what. Maybe it was the way sound carried differently there, with that perfect acoustic resonance that only vast spaces with high ceilings could achieve. But on this particular night, 3 months before that fateful gala, Darius noticed something different. The grand ballroom, usually empty except for the rows of chairs stored against the walls, had something new in it, or rather something old that had been uncovered. In the center of the room, catching the moonlight that streamed through the tall windows, stood a piano. Not just any piano, a Steinway grand, its black surface gleaming even under the dust that suggested it had been covered for years. Darius stopped pushing his cleaning cart. He stood there in the doorway, mop in hand, and stared. He hadn't seen a piano in person in over 20 years. Not since the day they'd taken his mother's upright away, loaded it onto a truck, along with most of their other belongings to pay off debts that had piled up after she died. That had been a different lifetime, a different Darius. A Darius who still believed in things like dreams and possibilities. But here was a piano. And here was Darius alone in the darkness, with no one to see, no one to judge, no one to tell him he didn't belong. He set down his mop. His feet carried him forward before his brain could lodge a protest. The wooden floor creaked slightly under his work boots, each step echoing in the vast space. As he got closer, he could see the details. The piano was magnificent. A 9-foot concert grand, the kind used in symphony halls. Its fallboard was closed, protecting the keys beneath, but Darius could see the name etched in gold lettering above it. Steinway and Sons. He recognized it from the classical music programs his mother used to watch on their old television back when watching was free and dreaming didn't cost anything. He shouldn't touch it, he knew that. This wasn't his piano. This wasn't his world. He was the janitor. His job was to clean around things, not interact with them. But his hand was already reaching out. His fingers, rough and scarred from years of manual labor, touched the smooth wood of the fallboard. It was cool to the touch, solid real. Slowly, carefully, he lifted it open. The keys were revealed a perfect landscape of black and white, 88 possibilities waiting in the darkness. Darius held his breath. He looked over his shoulder, suddenly paranoid that someone would appear and demand to know what he thought he was doing. But the estate was silent. The family slept in their wing far enough away that they'd never hear anything from here. The security system didn't cover the interior rooms, only the perimeter. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone. His right index finger extended. It hovered over middle C, trembling slightly. 27 years. It had been 27 years since he'd touched a piano key. 27 years since his mother's funeral, since his world had collapsed, since he'd packed away everything that mattered and learned to survive instead of live. The finger descended. The note rang out pure and clear, cutting through the silence like a bell. Middle C, the same note his mother had taught him when he was 6 years old. She'd placed his small hand on the keys and said, "This is where we start, baby. Right here in the middle. Everything else comes from this." Darius's eyes burned. He pressed the key again, then again. The note sang in the darkness, and with it came memories he'd spent decades trying to bury. His mother's laugh, the smell of the church where she'd taught piano on Saturday mornings, the feel of her hand guiding his fingers across the keys, her voice patient and warm. "You've got a gift, Darius. Don't ever forget that." But he had forgotten. Or rather, he'd been forced to forget. Gifts didn't pay bills. Dreams didn't put food on the table. And when his mother died suddenly from a stroke at 41, leaving 16-year-old Darius and his 8-year-old sister alone with nothing but debts and a funeral to pay for the piano, had been one of the first things to go. He'd tried to keep it. God, he'd tried. He'd begged the debt collectors, offered to make payments, promised he'd find a way. But they'd been kind and firm in that way adults are with children who don't understand how the world works. The piano was an asset, and it had value. And value could be converted to cash, which could pay down debts. Simple mathematics. Cold, practical final. Darius shook his head, pulling himself back to the present. That was a long time ago. He was different now. Harder. More practical. He'd raised his sister, got her through school, through college even. She was a teacher now, living 3 states away with a husband and 2 kids who called him Uncle Darius and sent him crayon drawings at Christmas. He'd done what he needed to do. He'd survived. That was enough. Wasn't it? His hand moved without permission. Not just one finger now, but all 5 settling into position over the keys. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of disuse, but not dead. Never dead. His fingers formed a C major chord. 3 notes, simple, basic. The foundation of everything. He pressed down. The chord bloomed in the air, rich and full, filling the ballroom with sound. Darius's breath caught in his throat. It was beautiful. After all these years, it was still beautiful. 1 chord became 2. 2 became 4. A simple progression, something his mother had taught him in their first lessons. CFG back to C. The circle of fifths, the backbone of 1,000 songs. His fingers moved across the keys, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. They were stiff, unpracticed, but they remembered. Of course they remembered. You don't forget something that was once part of your soul. Darius didn't realize he was crying until a tear dropped onto the keys, darkening the white ivory. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed even though no one was there to see. But he didn't stop playing. He couldn't stop. It had been too long. He'd been silent for too long. The simple progression evolved into something more complex. A melody emerged, something from deep in his memory. Chopin, maybe. Or Debussy. His mother had loved the Romantics, the Impressionists. Music that felt like emotion made audible. She'd played them constantly, filling their small apartment with beauty that contradicted the peeling paint and cramped rooms. Music isn't about where you play it, she'd told him once. It's about why. You can make magic in a palace or a shack. All that matters is what you put into it. Darius played until his fingers ached. He played until the sky outside began to lighten from black to deep blue. He played until he realized he'd spent nearly 3 hours at the piano and hadn't done a single bit of actual work. Panic seized him then. He'd lose this job if they found out he'd been wasting time. And he needed this job. The pay was decent. The hours worked with his daytime security guard position, and they didn't ask too many questions about gaps in employment history. He carefully closed the fallboard, ran his sleeve over the keys to wipe away any trace of fingerprints, and hurried back to his cart. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of frantic cleaning. He managed to finish most of the essential tasks enough that no one would notice if a few corners weren't quite as spotless as usual. But as he drove home in his old Honda that rattled at stoplights as he climbed the stairs to his 3rd-floor apartment, as he lay in bed watching the ceiling fan turn in slow circles, all Darius could think about was the piano. The feel of the keys under his fingers, the sound of the notes filling that vast ballroom. The way for just a few hours he'd felt like himself again, like the Darius he'd been before life had taught him to be smaller, quieter, invisible. He told himself it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness, an indulgence he couldn't afford to repeat. But even as he thought it, he knew he was lying. He'd be back tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that. The piano had awakened something in Darius Coleman. And once awakened, some things refused to go back to sleep. To understand what the piano meant to Darius, you have to understand what he'd lost. Not just the instrument itself, but everything it represented. The life he was supposed to have. The person he was supposed to become. Darius grew up in South Chicago, in a neighborhood where music was one of the few escapes from the reality of poverty and violence that colored daily life. His mother, Lorraine Coleman, had been a church pianist, one of those miraculous musicians who could play anything by ear. She'd never had formal training past high school, never went to conservatory, never had the opportunities that money and connections could buy. But what she lacked in formal education, she made up for in pure, undeniable talent. The Lighthouse Baptist Church where she played couldn't pay her much, but they did what they could. They let her give private lessons in the church basement during the week, keeping 30% for the building fund. It wasn't much, but combined with her day job as a medical receptionist, it was enough. Enough to keep them in their small apartment, enough to keep food on the table, enough to keep the upright piano that dominated their tiny living room. That piano was Lorraine's pride and joy. She'd bought it used, saved for 3 years to afford. It had it hauled up 3 flights of narrow stairs by 2 guys from the moving company who'd charged half price because one of them was a nephew of someone from church. It wasn't fancy. The veneer was chipped in places, some of the ivory on the keys had yellowed, and it went out of tune if you looked at it wrong. But to Lorraine, it was perfect. And to young Darius, it was magic. He'd started lessons when he was 5, sitting on Lorraine's lap because his legs couldn't reach the pedals yet. She'd guide his fingers over the keys, teaching him the basics. Where middle C lived, how to count rhythm, the difference between major and minor happy and sad, hope and heartbreak. Music theory became Darius's second language before he'd even mastered his first. By the time he was 8, he was playing hymns in church. By 10, he was good enough that his mother started entering him in youth competitions. Nothing major, just local things, community center showcases, and school talent shows. But Darius won. More often than not, he won. And with each win, Lorraine's dreams for him grew larger. "You're special, baby," she'd tell him, her eyes shining with pride that made Darius's chest swell. "You've got something real, a gift, and gifts like this don't come around often." She'd started researching music schools, conservatories, programs for talented youth, places with names like Juilliard and Curtis and New England Conservatory, places that seemed as distant and unreachable as the moon. But Lorraine believed. She believed with the fierce certainty of a mother who'd seen her son's potential and refused to let circumstances dictate his future. "We'll find a way," she'd promise. "You just keep practicing. Keep getting better. We'll find a way." Darius had believed her. At 14, 15, 16, he'd believed that talent and hard work were enough, that the world rewarded merit, that if you were good enough, if you wanted it badly enough, doors would open. His mother had taught him to believe in music, in art, in the transcendent power of beauty to overcome barriers. She'd been wrong. Or maybe not wrong exactly. Maybe just overly optimistic about how the world actually worked. Darius was 16 when it happened. A stroke, sudden and catastrophic. Lorraine had been at work feeling fine one moment, and then she simply collapsed. By the time the ambulance got her to the hospital, half her brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. She never regained consciousness. The doctor said it was a massive hemorrhage, probably from an aneurysm she'd had her whole life without knowing. "These things happen," they said. "Sometimes there's no warning. Sometimes people just die." She was 41 years old. She had a 16-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. She had no life insurance because she couldn't afford the premiums. She had medical bills from the 3 days she spent in the ICU before they turned off the machines. She had funeral costs because dying is expensive. She had debts, so many debts that Darius hadn't even known about because she'd hidden them from him, trying to protect him, trying to let him focus on his music instead of their constantly precarious financial situation. The state wanted to take them. Child Protective Services showed up at their door 2 weeks after the funeral with sympathetic faces and clipboards. There was no father in the picture. Darius's dad had left before his sister was born, and they had no idea where he was. There were no relatives able or willing to take in 2 kids. The social worker was kind, apologetic even, but firm. Darius and his sister would need to enter the foster system. Darius had stood in that doorway, this tall, skinny kid, who'd just lost his mother, who was supposed to be thinking about college applications and music school auditions, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He told them no. He was 16, almost 17. He could emancipate. He could take care of his sister. They didn't need the system. The social worker had looked at him with something like pity. "Honey," she'd said, "I admire what you're trying to do, but you're a child yourself. You can't possibly support a household. Where will you work? Where will you live? What happens to your sister when you're at school?" Darius had straightened his spine, made himself taller, older. "I'll figure it out," he'd said. "Just give me a chance. Give us a chance." They'd argued. There'd been meetings, evaluations, home visits, but eventually, somehow, through a combination of Darius's determination and a sympathetic judge, and maybe just bureaucratic fatigue, they'd granted his petition for emancipation with conditions. He'd be monitored. His sister would be monitored. Any sign that he couldn't handle it, and they'd both go into the system. Darius had dropped out of school the next week. Not officially at first. He'd kept showing up, kept trying to balance everything. But it became impossible quickly. He got a job at a warehouse, lying about his age, working overnight shifts. Then a second job at a grocery store during the day. Then odd jobs whenever he could find them. He slept 4 hours a night if he was lucky. He made sure his sister got to school, did her homework, ate regular meals. He made sure the rent was paid, the lights stayed on, the water ran. And one by one he sold everything they owned that had any value. The TV, his mother's jewelry, the dishes, the furniture. And finally, inevitably, the piano. He'd held out for 3 months. He'd told himself there had to be another way. He'd tried to keep it this last piece of his mother, this last connection to the dreams they'd shared. But the debts were crushing. The medical bills alone were over $60,000. The funeral had cost $8,000. They were drowning, and the piano was the only life raft he had. The man from the music store had been businesslike about it. He'd examined the instrument, played a few scales, checked the soundboard and the hammers. "It's in decent shape," he'd said. "But it's old and it's not a particularly valuable model. I can give you $1,200 for it." $1,200 for the piano his mother had saved 3 years to buy, for the instrument that had been the center of their family life, for the thing that represented everything Darius had once hoped to become. He'd taken the money. He'd watched them loaded onto a truck. He'd signed the papers. And then he'd gone into the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. His sister Keisha had been 8 years old. She'd watched from the window as they took the piano away. When Darius came out of the bathroom, pale and shaking, she'd been crying. "Are we going to be okay?" she'd asked, her voice small and frightened. Darius had knelt down, taken her small hands in his. "Yes," he'd lied. "We're going to be okay, I promise." It took him 6 years to make good on that promise. 6 years of working multiple jobs, of sacrificing everything, of watching other kids his age go to college and build careers and live the lives he'd once imagined for himself. But he did it. He kept them together. He kept them fed and housed. He got Keisha through elementary school, through middle school, through high school. He made sure she had what she needed, even when that meant he had nothing. She'd been smart, his sister. Smarter than him, probably. She'd gotten scholarships, financial aid. She'd gone to state university and studied education. She'd graduated, got a teaching job, fell in love, got married. She'd built a good life. And Darius had been proud. So proud. He'd sat in the audience at her college graduation wearing a suit he'd borrowed from a guy at work and watched her walk across that stage and felt like maybe all the sacrifice had been worth it. Maybe giving up his dreams had been the right choice if it meant she could achieve hers. But late at night, in that space between sleep and waking, he sometimes wondered about the alternate timeline, the one where his mother hadn't died, the one where he'd gone to music school, the one where Darius Coleman became the pianist he was supposed to be instead of the janitor he'd had to become. He didn't let himself think about it often. There was no point. You couldn't change the past. You couldn't undo decisions made under duress. You could only move forward, survive, endure. But then he'd found the piano at Bellwood Estate. And suddenly, unexpectedly, the past wasn't past anymore. It was right there under his fingers, waiting to be reclaimed. The question was whether a 43-year-old man who'd spent half his life cleaning other people's messes could find his way back to the boy who'd once believed in dreams. Whether 27 years of silence could be broken by 3 hours in the darkness with an instrument that didn't belong to him. Darius wasn't sure, but he knew he had to try, because some hungers once awakened can't be ignored. And the hunger for music, for beauty, for the person you once were, and might still become, that's the deepest hunger of all. The next night, Darius returned to the ballroom with a mixture of anticipation and guilt that sat heavy in his chest. He told himself he'd just play for a few minutes, just enough to satisfy the craving. Then he'd get back to work, do his job properly, be responsible. But the moment his fingers touched the keys, responsibility became a distant concept. The first week was tentative. Darius would finish his cleaning duties first, working faster than usual, cutting corners, he hoped. No one would notice. Only after the rest of the estate was done would he allow himself to approach the piano. And even then, he'd stand there for long minutes, arguing with himself, before finally giving in. His fingers were rusty, unpracticed. The muscle memory was there, buried deep, but accessing it was like trying to remember a language you hadn't spoken since childhood. He'd start with scales, the building blocks his mother had drilled into him. C major, G major, D major. The circle of fifths working his way around. His fingers stumbled, missed notes, pressed keys too hard or too soft. But gradually, incrementally, they began to remember. By the third night, he'd moved beyond scales to simple pieces. For Elise, the song Every Beginning Pianist Learns. Canon in D, which he'd played at his mother's funeral, though he'd barely been able to see the keys through his tears. The notes came back to him like old friends, familiar and comforting. But it was on the fifth night that everything changed. Darius was rifling through the piano bench, looking for nothing in particular, when his fingers brushed against something wedged into the corner. He pulled it out carefully. It was sheet music, yellowed with age, the edges brittle. The paper was thick, expensive, professional grade. The title was written in elegant script across the top, Nocturne in E-flat major op 9 num 2, Chopin. Darius's hands trembled as he held the music. This exact piece had been his mother's favorite. She'd played it constantly, especially late at night when she thought he was asleep. He'd lie in his bed, eyes closed, and listen to the notes drift through their small apartment, beautiful and melancholy. She'd never played it perfectly. There were always a few mistakes, a few rough transitions. But she'd played it with so much emotion that the technical imperfections didn't matter. "This is what music is about," she'd told him once when he'd asked why she always came back to this piece. "It's not about perfection. It's about feeling." Chopin understood that. He wrote music that sounds like a human heart, with all its flaws and yearnings. That's what makes it beautiful. Darius set the sheet music on the stand. His eyes scanned the notes, and like reading once learned, the skill came back quickly. He could see the music, hear it in his head before his fingers even touched the keys. The gentle opening like a question being asked. The way the melody climbed and fell, searching for something it could never quite reach. The bittersweet resolution that felt both sad and hopeful at once. He began to play. The first few measures were halting, uncertain. He had to stop and start several times, checking the notation, reminding himself of the fingering. But as he continued, something shifted. The music stopped being notes on a page and became something else. Something alive. Something that felt like memory made audible. He could hear his mother's voice, patient and encouraging. "Let it breathe, baby. Don't rush. The silence between notes matters as much as the notes themselves." His fingers moved across the keys, and 27 years dissolved. He wasn't a middle-aged janitor anymore. He was a teenage boy in a cramped living room playing for his mother while she hummed along, her hand resting on his shoulder. He could almost feel the weight of it, the warmth, the way she'd squeeze gently when he got a particularly difficult passage right. Darius played the nocturne 3 times that night. Then 4, then he lost count. Each time it felt a little more natural. Each time a little more of the rust fell away. Each time he felt a little more like himself. His real self. The self he'd buried to survive. When he finally looked at the clock, it was 4 in the morning. He'd spent almost 5 hours at the piano. 5 hours of work left undone. He felt a stab of panic, but it was distant, muted. What he felt more than anything was alive. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Darius Coleman felt truly, completely alive. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Darius would arrive at 10 p.m., do the bare minimum of cleaning necessary to avoid suspicion, and then spend the rest of his shift at the piano. He brought a small flashlight so he wouldn't have to turn on the ballroom lights, which might attract attention. He kept his playing soft, using the piano's soft pedal to mute the sound. And he listened constantly for footsteps ready to close the fallboard and flee at the slightest hint of discovery. But no one came. The Pemberton wing was far enough away that even without the soft pedal, they probably wouldn't hear him. The estate was huge, built in an era when wealthy families wanted to ensure they never had to encounter their servants unless absolutely necessary. The irony wasn't lost on Darius. The same architecture meant to keep people like him invisible was now allowing him to reclaim a part of himself that had been invisible for far too long. He began to explore the piano bench more thoroughly. There were dozens of pieces of music stuffed inside, some in better condition than others. He found Beethoven's sonatas, Rachmaninoff preludes, Debussy's Clair de Lune, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. It was an eclectic collection, ranging from classical to romantic to early modern. Whoever had owned this music had sophisticated taste. Curiosity got the better of him. One night, instead of going straight to the piano, Darius detoured to the estate's library. Mrs. Pemberton had an extensive collection, including several books on the history of the house. He found what he was looking for in a leather-bound volume titled The Pemberton Legacy: 200 Years of History. There was a chapter about the renovations done in the 1950s when the current ballroom was added. And there, in a grainy black and white photograph, was the piano. But it wasn't in the ballroom. It was in a smaller music room, and seated at it was a young woman, her hands poised over the keys, her face turned toward the camera with a slight smile. The caption read, "Catherine Pemberton, 1952. Catherine was an accomplished pianist who studied at the Peabody Conservatory before returning to Bellwood. She frequently hosted salon concerts in the music room, bringing culture and refinement to the estate." Darius read further. Catherine had married young to a man from another wealthy family, but she'd continued to play, performing locally, teaching advanced students. She'd been, by all accounts, exceptionally talented. People had come from neighboring states to hear her play. She'd been on the cusp of a professional career when she'd chosen marriage and family instead, as was expected of women of her generation and class. She'd died in 1998 at the age of 68. The article mentioned that in her later years, she'd rarely played, citing arthritis and fading interest. After her death, the music room had been converted to other uses, and the piano had been moved to the ballroom, where it had sat largely forgotten for over 2 decades. Darius stared at the photograph for a long time. Catherine Pemberton looked happy in the picture, but there was something in her eyes that he recognized. A kind of wistfulness. The look of someone who'd chosen duty over desire and was still wondering if it had been the right choice. He wondered if Catherine had felt in her later years the way he sometimes felt, like she'd abandoned a part of herself, like she'd silenced something essential. He wondered if she'd ever sat at this piano and played in the darkness, trying to reclaim what she'd given up. The thought created a strange kinship. Across decades and vast differences in circumstance, Darius felt connected to this woman he'd never met. 2 people who'd loved music, who'd had talent, who'd sacrificed it for practical reasons. 2 people who'd gone silent. But Darius was tired of being silent. He'd spent 27 years as a footnote in other people's stories, 27 years being invisible, being useful, being anything except himself. And now, in this vast, empty ballroom, with this beautiful instrument and these yellowed sheets of music, he had a chance to be seen again, even if the only one watching was himself. He started practicing with intention. He set goals. He'd master the Chopin Nocturne perfectly, then move on to something more challenging. The Beethoven Moonlight Sonata, then Clair de Lune, then eventually the pieces that had intimidated him even as a teenager. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, the pieces that separated amateur from artist. His fingers grew stronger. The calluses from his janitorial work actually helped. His fingertips could press harder, sustain notes longer without pain. His shoulders, broad from years of physical labor, gave him power for the more demanding passages. His body, which he'd always thought of as a tool for survival, became an instrument for beauty. He practiced every night. 6 nights a week, 4 to 5 hours each night. He slept less, compensated with caffeine and sheer force of will. He was exhausted constantly, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful instead of merely necessary. His daytime security guard job suffered a bit. He'd catch himself nodding off during the quiet hours, startling awake when his head dropped. But he managed. He always managed. That had been his gift, if you could call it that. The ability to endure, to persist, to keep going when anyone else would have quit. But this was different. This wasn't enduring. This was living. This was remembering what it felt like to have a purpose beyond simply surviving to the next day. And once you remember that feeling, once you taste what it's like to be truly engaged with something that matters, it's almost impossible to go back to sleep. Darius Coleman was waking up. And the longer he played, the more awake he became, the more he realized how deeply he'd been sleeping. For 27 years, he'd told himself that sacrifice was noble, that giving up his dreams for his sister had been the right choice, the only choice. And maybe it had been. Maybe he'd done what needed to be done. But somewhere in those years of sacrifice, he'd stopped being a person and become a function, a provider, a caretaker, a worker. All necessary roles, all honorable in their way. But none of them were him. None of them were Darius, the boy who'd played piano in church, who'd won competitions, who'd dreamed of conservatories and concert halls. That Darius had been buried for so long, Darius had assumed he was dead. But he wasn't dead. He'd just been waiting. Waiting for a chance, a opening, a moment when it might be safe to emerge. And now in these stolen hours, in a ballroom that wasn't his, playing a piano, that didn't belong to him, that buried self was fighting its way back to the surface. Darius could feel it like something breaking through soil toward sunlight. It was painful and exhilarating in equal measure. He didn't know where this would lead. He had no plans, no goals beyond simply playing, simply feeling like himself again. But for now, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The piano became his teacher, his therapist, his church. Each night he'd sit at those keys and pour out everything he'd been holding in for decades. The grief over his mother, the rage at a world that valued money over talent station over substance, the bone-deep weariness of always being underestimated, always being invisible. And underneath all of that, the stubborn, irrepressible hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. That a life could be reclaimed even after it seemed irrevocably lost. The music held all of it. The anger and the hope, the sorrow and the joy, the past and the possibility of a future. Darius played like a man possessed because, in a way, he was. Possessed by the ghost of who he'd once been and might still become. And then, on a Tuesday night in early October, 3 months after he'd first discovered the piano, everything changed because Darius made a mistake. He got careless. He'd been so careful for so long, always listening, always aware. But on this night he was deep into Rachmaninoff's prelude, lost in the thundering chords and cascading arpeggios, playing with more confidence and power than he'd felt in years. He didn't hear the footsteps approaching the ballroom. He didn't see the door open. He didn't notice anything until a voice cut through the music, sharp and shocked. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" Darius's hands froze over the keys. His heart stopped. He turned slowly, already knowing what he'd see, but hoping somehow that he was wrong. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, was Mrs. Victoria Pemberton. She wore a silk robe and an expression that combined shock, anger, and something else Darius couldn't quite identify. Her hand was still on the doorknob, as if she'd been about to enter, and then stopped, stunned by what she'd found. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The last notes of the Rachmaninoff hung in the air, slowly fading into silence. And in that silence, Darius could feel everything he'd been building for 3 months beginning to crumble. He was caught. It was over. The brief window when he'd been able to reclaim a piece of himself was closing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Mrs. Pemberton, I can explain." Darius began, standing up from the piano bench so quickly that it scraped loudly against the wooden floor. "Explain?" Her voice was cold, controlled, but there was something underneath it that Darius couldn't quite read. Explain why my janitor is playing my piano in the middle of the night. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I know that. I was just... Darius fumbled for words, his mind racing. How could he possibly explain? How could he make this woman who lived in a world so different from his understand what the piano meant to him? Mrs. Pemberton took a step into the ballroom, and Darius instinctively took a step back, putting the piano bench between them. She was a small woman, barely 5'4", but she carried herself with the kind of authority that made her seem much larger. Her gray hair was perfectly styled even at this hour, and her eyes were sharp, assessing. How long has this been going on? She demanded. 3 months, Darius admitted. There was no point in lying. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have touched it. I saw it and I couldn't help myself. I used to play. A long time ago. You used to play... Mrs. Pemberton repeated her tone, suggesting this was the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. And you thought that gave you permission to use my property without asking, No, ma'am, I didn't think. Darius trailed off. How could he explain the pull he'd felt? The way the piano had called to him. She'd think he was crazy. Maybe he was crazy. Mrs. Pemberton walked further into the room, circling around him, examining the piano. She picked up the sheet music still resting on the stand. Rachmaninoff, she murmured. Prelude in C-sharp minor. My mother-in-law's favorite piece. She used to play it brilliantly. Catherine, Darius said without thinking. Catherine Pemberton. I read about her in the library. She studied at Peabody, Mrs. Pemberton's eyes snapped to him, sharp and surprised. You read about her. I was curious. About the piano. Its history. Darius knew he should stop talking, should just accept whatever punishment was coming, but the words kept coming. She was very talented. I saw the photographs, the write-ups about her performances. She gave it all up to marry your father-in-law. Something shifted in Mrs. Pemberton's expression. The anger was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. She did, Mrs. Pemberton said quietly. It was what was expected of her. Women of her generation, of her class, they didn't pursue careers. They married well and raised families and supported their husbands' ambitions. Did she regret it? Darius asked, then immediately wished he hadn't. That was too personal, too presumptuous. But Mrs. Pemberton didn't snap at him. Instead, she looked at the piano with an expression that might have been sadness. I think so, yes. She never said as much, not directly, but I could see it sometimes, especially near the end. She'd look at this piano with such longing. My husband, her son, he wanted to get it refurbished, find someone to play it again. But she wouldn't allow it. She said if she couldn't play it anymore, she'd rather it sat silent. That's heartbreaking, Darius said. It is, Mrs. Pemberton agreed. Then she turned back to him, and the sharpness returned to her gaze. But that doesn't excuse what you've done. You've been trespassing, essentially, using something that doesn't belong to you, neglecting your actual duties, I assume, to indulge in this. Darius felt shame burn through him. She was right. He'd been stealing time, stealing access, stealing something that wasn't his. No matter how much he'd justified it to himself, it was still theft. You're right, he said. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. I'll pack up my things and leave. I didn't say you were fired, Mrs. Pemberton said. Darius looked up, startled. You didn't. I'm considering it, she said. But first I want to know something. How did you learn to play like that? Like what? Like a professional, Mrs. Pemberton said, and there was no mistaking the genuine curiosity in her voice now. I've heard concert pianists who couldn't play Rachmaninoff with that much feeling. Where did you study? Darius laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I didn't study, not the way you mean. My mother taught me. She was a church pianist. I had lessons with her from the time I was 5 until she died when I was 16. That's it. No conservatory, no formal training, just her in our living room teaching me everything she knew. That's impossible, Mrs. Pemberton said flatly. No one plays Rachmaninoff at that level with just informal training. I'm not playing it at that level, Darius protested. I'm sure I'm making a dozen mistakes. My technique is probably terrible. I haven't touched a piano in 27 years until I found this one. 27 years? Mrs. Pemberton stared at him. You haven't played in 27 years and you can play like that? Darius shrugged helplessly. My mother said I had a gift, but gifts don't matter much when you need to work 3 jobs to survive. Something in Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened further. What happened to your mother? And so Darius told her. Standing there in the ballroom in the middle of the night, he told this wealthy woman he barely knew about his mother's sudden death, about raising his sister, about selling the piano, about the 27 years of silence that had followed, about finding this instrument and feeling for the first time in nearly 3 decades like himself again. He didn't mean to say all of it. He'd learned long ago that people didn't want to hear about his problems, especially not wealthy people who couldn't possibly understand what it was like to choose between dreams and survival. But something about the late hour, about being caught, about the way Mrs. Pemberton was actually listening, made the words pour out. When he finished, Mrs. Pemberton was silent for a long moment. She walked to the piano, ran her hand over its surface the way Darius had that first night. My mother-in-law, she said finally, used to say that music wasn't a luxury, that it was as essential as breathing. My husband never understood what she meant. He's a practical man. He sees instruments as investments, as status symbols, but I think I understand now. She turned to face Darius. I'm not going to fire you, she said, but I am going to change your arrangement. Darius's stomach dropped. Here it came. Reduced hours. Probation. Something that would make it clear she didn't trust him anymore. I'm going to pay you extra, Mrs. Pemberton continued, and Darius nearly fell over. $200 more per week. In exchange, I want you to play this piano. Not just during your cleaning shifts. I want you to come during the day when you're not exhausted from your other job. I want you to practice properly with the lights on, with the full sound. And I want you to bring this instrument back to life the way my mother-in-law never could. Darius couldn't speak. He stood there, mouth open, unable to process what he was hearing. Unless you don't want to, Mrs. Pemberton said, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice now. I want to, Darius managed. Why would you do that? Mrs. Pemberton looked at him for a long moment. Because, she said, I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who do things because they're expected, because they're profitable, because they look good. I've almost forgotten what it's like to meet someone who does something simply because they love it, because they can't help themselves. My mother-in-law was like that. And you, she gestured at the piano. You play like someone who needs music to survive. That's rare and valuable. More valuable than most people realize. She walked toward the door, then paused. There's a charity gala in 3 months, she said. We hold it every year. Very prestigious. Very important to my husband's business connections. We've already hired a pianist for the evening, a man named Harrison Whitfield. Very accomplished, very expensive. But I'm thinking we should add an opening performance. Something unexpected. Would you be interested? Darius felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You want me to perform at a gala in front of all those people? I do, Mrs. Pemberton said. Unless you're not ready. I'm not ready, Darius said immediately. I'm nowhere near ready. Those people, they'd expect a professional. I'm just what? Mrs. Pemberton interrupted. Just a janitor. Just someone without formal training. Just someone who couldn't possibly be good enough. Her voice had an edge now. Let me tell you something, Mr. Coleman. I've attended more charity galas than I can count. I've heard dozens of professionally trained pianists play. Most of them are technically perfect and emotionally empty. They play notes, not music. You, in the 5 minutes I stood in that doorway listening before you noticed me, you made me feel something. You made me think of my mother-in-law, of what she gave up, of the music that died when she stopped playing. That's worth more than all the technical perfection in the world. Darius felt tears burning behind his eyes. He blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Mrs. Pemberton said simply. Say you'll take this chance. Say you'll stop hiding your gift in the darkness and let people see what you can do. And despite every logical reason to refuse, despite the terror that was already building in his chest at the thought of performing in front of wealthy strangers who would judge him despite everything that told him this was a terrible idea, Darius heard himself say, "Yes, I'll do it." Mrs. Pemberton smiled a genuine smile that transformed her usually stern face. Good. Then I'll see you tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. We'll discuss the specifics. She started to leave, then turned back one more time. And Mr. Coleman, thank you for bringing music back to this house. My mother-in-law would have been happy to know her piano found someone who truly loves it. Then she was gone, leaving Darius alone in the ballroom with the piano, and a future that had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. He sat back down on the bench, his hands trembling. 3 months ago, he'd been a janitor with no prospects, no future beyond the next paycheck. Now he was going to perform at a charity gala in front of the kind of people who'd never looked twice at him in his entire life. It was terrifying. It was insane. It was the most unlikely thing that had ever happened to him. But as Darius placed his hands back on the keys and began to play, he felt something he hadn't felt in 27 years. Hope. The next afternoon, Darius showed up at Bellwood Estate at 2 o'clock sharp, still not entirely convinced the previous night had actually happened. Maybe he'd dreamed it. Maybe Mrs. Pemberton had been sleepwalking and wouldn't remember offering him this impossible opportunity. Maybe, but no. She was waiting for him in the ballroom, dressed in an elegant pantsuit, looking every inch the society matron she was. Next to her stood a man Darius didn't recognize, tall and thin with wire-rimmed glasses and an expensive-looking leather portfolio. Mr. Coleman, Mrs. Pemberton greeted him. Thank you for coming. This is Thomas Hendricks, our estate manager. He'll be handling the logistics of your new arrangement. Thomas extended his hand, and Darius shook it, noting the firm grip and assessing gaze. This was a man who'd worked for wealthy families long enough to know how to read people. Darius wondered what he saw when he looked at the janitor, who'd somehow convinced his employer to pay him to play piano. Mrs. Pemberton has explained the situation. Thomas said, his tone professional, but not unkind. We'll be adjusting your schedule. You'll still handle your evening janitorial duties 3 nights per week instead of 6. The other 3 afternoons from 2 to 6, you'll have access to the ballroom for practice. Does that work for you? Darius's mind raced. 3 nights instead of 6 meant less money from the janitorial work, but the additional $200 per week Mrs. Pemberton had mentioned would more than make up for it. And 4 hours of dedicated practice time 3 times a week in a proper space with proper lighting. That works, he said, trying to keep the emotion out of his voice. Thank you. Good, Mrs. Pemberton said. Now about the gala. It's in exactly 12 weeks, Saturday, December 15th. We typically have around 200 guests. The pianist we've hired, Harrison Whitfield, will be performing the main program after dinner. But I want you to open the evening right when guests are arriving for cocktails. Something dramatic, something that will catch their attention immediately. 15 to 20 minutes of music. 15 to 20 minutes. Darius did the quick math. 3, maybe 4 pieces depending on what he chose. Manageable, theoretically, except for the part where he'd be playing in front of 200 wealthy strangers who expected professional quality. "I need to be honest with you," Darius said. "I'm rusty, more than rusty. I've been playing for 3 months after a 27-year break. I make mistakes. My technique isn't polished. If you want someone who's going to be technically perfect, I don't—" Mrs. Pemberton interrupted. "If I wanted technical perfection, I'd just let Harrison play the whole evening. What I want is what I heard last night. Passion, authenticity, music that makes people feel something. Can you do that?" Could he? Darius honestly didn't know. Playing alone in the darkness was one thing. Playing in front of people was something else entirely. But he'd already said yes. And some small, stubborn part of him that had been dormant for decades was waking up and demanding to be heard. "I can try," he said. "That's all I'm asking," Mrs. Pemberton said. She nodded to Thomas, who handed Darius a key. "This is for the ballroom," Thomas explained. "You can come and go during your scheduled practice times. The room will be reserved for you. No one will disturb you." Darius took the key, feeling its weight in his palm. A key to a ballroom with a Steinway grand piano. It felt like a key to something much larger than just a room. Over the next few weeks, Darius settled into his new routine. He'd work his daytime security guard job from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., grab a quick lunch, then head to Bellwood Estate for his practice sessions. The first few times he felt like an imposter walking through the front door in the middle of the day, instead of slipping in through the service entrance at night. The day staff looked at him with curiosity, and in some cases, suspicion. Who was this janitor who suddenly had access to the family's ballroom? But Mrs. Pemberton had apparently made it clear that Darius was not to be questioned or bothered. So while people stared, no one said anything. He'd make his way to the ballroom, unlock the door with his key, and step into what had become his sanctuary. The first thing he did was choose his repertoire. He needed pieces that showcased different aspects of his playing that built to a satisfying climax that would demonstrate he was more than just technically competent. After much deliberation, he settled on 4 pieces, first Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The piece that had started everything, the piece his mother had loved. It would serve as a gentle, beautiful opening drawing people in with its lyrical melody. Second, Debussy's Clair de Lune. Another crowd pleaser, but with more complexity. The impressionistic harmonies would show his ability to handle nuance and color. Third, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Third movement. This was the risk piece. Fast, furious, technically demanding. If he could pull it off, it would prove he had chops. If he couldn't, it would be a disaster. And finally back to Chopin, the revolutionary Etude. Another technically challenging piece, but one with deep emotional resonance. Music that sounded like anger and determination and hope all mixed together. Music that felt to Darius like his own life story. He practiced each piece separately, at first breaking them down into sections, identifying the problem spots, drilling them over and over until his fingers could execute them reliably. It was frustrating work. His hands would cramp. His back would ache from sitting so long. He'd play a passage perfectly 10 times, then mess it up on the 11th and have to start over. But slowly, incrementally, he improved. The pieces began to flow instead of stutter. His confidence grew. He started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could actually do this. About 6 weeks before the gala, Thomas knocked on the ballroom door during one of Darius's practice sessions. "Mr. Coleman, sorry to interrupt. Mrs. Pemberton asked me to let you know that Harrison Whitfield will be arriving early to practice. He'll be here in about 15 minutes. She thought you might want to meet him." Darius's stomach clenched. Harrison Whitfield. The real pianist. The professional who'd actually made a career out of music, who'd gone to the best schools, who performed in concert halls around the country. What would he think of Darius? What would he say when he learned that a janitor was going to be opening for him? "Sure," Darius said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'd like to meet him." 15 minutes later, Harrison Whitfield swept into the ballroom like he owned it. He was probably in his early 50s, with silver hair styled just so, wearing what Darius recognized, even with his limited fashion knowledge, as an extremely expensive suit. He carried himself with the kind of casual arrogance that comes from a lifetime of being told, "You're exceptional." "Ah, the famous Steinway," Harrison said, approaching the piano without so much as glancing at Darius. "I've heard stories about this instrument, Catherine Pemberton's piano. She was quite good, you know. I heard her play once at a salon concert when I was still a student. Remarkable technique for someone who was essentially self-taught." He ran his fingers over the keys, playing a quick scale. "Needs tuning," he pronounced. "I'll have my technician come in tomorrow." Mrs. Pemberton, who'd followed him in, spoke up. "Harrison, I'd like you to meet Darius Coleman. He'll be opening the Gala with a short performance before your set." Harrison finally looked at Darius, and the assessment in his eyes was instant and dismissive. He took in the work clothes, the rough hands, the overall appearance of someone who worked with his body instead of his mind. "I see," he said coolly. "And what's your background, Mr. Coleman? Where did you study?" "I didn't," Darius said, forcing himself to meet Harrison's gaze. "I'm self-taught. My mother gave me lessons when I was young." "Self-taught." Harrison repeated his tone, making it clear what he thought of that. "Well, how charming. A sort of curiosity act before the main performance. I'm sure the guests will find it amusing." Darius felt heat rise in his face, but before he could respond, Mrs. Pemberton cut in her voice sharp. "Mr. Coleman is an exceptionally talented musician. I've heard him play, and I can assure you he's far more than a curiosity act." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "My apologies," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't apologetic at all. "I didn't mean to cause offense. I'm sure you're quite competent for an amateur." He turned back to the piano, already dismissing Darius from his attention. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to familiarize myself with the instrument." Darius wanted to say something, wanted to defend himself, wanted to prove to this arrogant man that talent didn't only belong to people with fancy degrees and prestigious training. But what could he say? Harrison was right. Darius was an amateur. He hadn't studied at conservatories. He hadn't performed professionally. He was just a janitor who'd gotten lucky enough to be given a chance. "Of course," Darius set his voice tight. "I'll get out of your way." He left the ballroom, but not before he heard Harrison say to Mrs. Pemberton, "Victoria, are you sure about this? I understand you want to be charitable, but this is a high-profile event. If he embarrasses himself—" "He won't," Mrs. Pemberton said firmly. "And even if he did, which he won't, it would still be worth it." Darius didn't hear Harrison's response. He'd already walked far enough down the hallway that the voices faded. But the dismissal in Harrison's tone stayed with him. Curiosity act. Amateur. Charming. All the old doubts came flooding back. Who was he kidding? He was a 43-year-old janitor with delusions of grandeur. He'd had 3 months of practice after a 27-year break. Harrison Whitfield had probably been practicing for 40 years, every single day, with the best teachers money could buy. There was no comparison. Darius went home that night and seriously considered backing out. He could tell Mrs. Pemberton he'd made a mistake, that he'd overestimated his abilities, that she should just let Harrison handle the entire evening. She'd understand. She'd probably even be relieved. She'd made her charitable gesture, given the poor janitor a chance, and if he chose not to take it well, that was his decision. But then Darius thought about his mother, about the way she'd believed in him, even when no one else did, about the countless hours she'd spent teaching him, encouraging him, telling him he had something special, about the dreams they'd shared before reality had crushed them both. And he thought about Catherine Pemberton, the talented pianist who'd given up her career, who'd let her gift go silent, who'd spent the last years of her life looking at this piano with longing and regret. He thought about all the people who'd given up on their dreams because someone told them they weren't good enough, weren't trained enough, weren't the right kind of person to deserve success. And Darius decided he was done letting other people define what he could or couldn't do. He was done being invisible, being quiet, being less than he was because it made other people comfortable. If he was going to fail, at least he'd fail while trying to be himself. That was more than he'd been able to say for the last 27 years. The next day, he went back to the ballroom and practiced harder than ever. And if the memory of Harrison Whitfield's dismissive tone added an edge to his playing, an intensity that hadn't been there before, well, sometimes anger could be fuel too. The 12 weeks before the gala became a blur of work practice and sleep. Darius maintained his security guard job, worked his reduced janitorial shifts at the estate, and spent every spare moment at the piano. He practiced until his fingers ached, until his back was stiff, until the notes blurred together, and he could barely think straight. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Every time he thought he'd mastered a piece, he'd play it the next day and find new mistakes, new rough spots, new sections that needed work. The Beethoven Third Movement in particular was proving nearly impossible. The speed, the precision required, the way one wrong note could throw off the entire passage. Darius would sometimes play it 20 times in a row and only get through it cleanly once or twice. "Maybe I should drop it," he told Mrs. Pemberton during one of her visits to check on his progress. "Choose something easier, something I can actually play consistently." Mrs. Pemberton, who'd taken to stopping by once a week to listen, shook her head. "No, keep it. The pieces that challenge us are the ones worth playing. Besides, I've heard you nail that movement. You can do it. You just need to trust yourself." Trust himself. That was the problem. Wasn't it Darius had spent so much of his life not trusting himself, not believing he deserved good things, not thinking he was worthy of opportunities? Even now, with the gala approaching, part of him kept waiting for someone to realize this was all a mistake and take it away from him. About a month before the performance, Darius discovered he wasn't entirely alone in the ballroom. One afternoon, he looked up from his practice to find Thomas Hendricks sitting quietly in one of the chairs along the wall. The estate manager had been so still, Darius hadn't noticed him. "Sorry," Thomas said when he realized Darius had spotted him. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just passing by and heard you playing. I hope you don't mind." "No, it's fine," Darius said, though he felt self-conscious now. "How long have you been there?" "About 20 minutes, Thomas admitted. "You were working on the Chopin Etude, the revolutionary rite?" Darius nodded, surprised. "You know music?" Thomas smiled a real smile that softened his usually professional demeanor. "I used to. I was a violinist, believe it or not. Studied at Eastman School of Music, thought I was going to play professionally. But life had other plans. I ended up in estate management instead." "What happened?" Darius asked, then immediately felt he'd overstepped. "Sorry, that's probably too personal." "It's all right," Thomas said. He stood and walked closer to the piano. "I wasn't good enough. That's the truth of it. I was competent, technically proficient, but I didn't have that spark, that thing that separates the good from the great. I realized it during my senior recital. I played perfectly, hit every note, did everything right. And afterwards, my professor came up to me and said, 'That was very nice, Thomas. Very correct. And I knew. Nice. Correct. Those aren't words you want to hear when you're hoping to be brilliant. Darius absorbed this. So you gave it up? I transitioned, Thomas corrected gently. I still play for myself sometimes, still love music, but I found other ways to be successful, other ways to feel fulfilled. Not everyone is meant to be a performer, and there's no shame in that. But you regret it, Darius said. It wasn't a question. Thomas considered this. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, yeah, I wonder what would have happened if I'd pushed harder, tried longer. But mostly I'm at peace with it. I had to be, or the regret would eat me alive. He looked at Darius carefully. But you're different. You have what I didn't. I could hear it just now in the way you were playing. You're not correct. You're not nice. You're real, and that's much more valuable. I'm terrified, Darius admitted. The gala's getting close, and I keep thinking about all the ways I'm going to screw this up, all the people who are going to be judging me. Of course you're terrified, Thomas said. You'd be insane not to be. But here's the thing about fear, Darius. It means you care. It means this matters to you. The day you stop being nervous before a performance is the day you should worry, because it means you've stopped giving a damn. Over the remaining weeks, Thomas became an unexpected ally. He'd stop by during practice sessions not to hover or critique, but just to listen. Sometimes he'd offer suggestions, pointing out passages that could use different phrasing or dynamics. Sometimes he'd just sit there, and his presence was somehow comforting. A reminder that Darius wasn't entirely alone in this impossible thing he was trying to do. 2 weeks before the gala, Harrison Whitfield returned to the estate for another practice session. This time, he arrived while Darius was still in the ballroom, working through the opening of Clair de Lune. Darius heard the door open, but didn't stop playing. He'd learned that interrupting practice for every distraction was a good way to never make progress. Harrison stood by the door listening. When Darius finished the piece, he turned to find the professional pianist watching him with an expression that was harder to read than before. Not quite dismissive, but not exactly welcoming either. "You've improved," Harrison said. It wasn't quite a compliment, more a statement of fact. "Still rough in places, but better than I expected." "Thank you," Darius said, unsure how else to respond. Harrison walked to the piano, his movements precise and controlled. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. Darius stood and moved aside. Harrison sat down, adjusted the bench height, slightly flexed his fingers, and then began to play the same Debussy piece Darius had just finished. The difference was immediate and stark. Harrison's technique was flawless. Every note perfectly weighted, every phrase shaped with professional precision. The dynamics were exactly right. The tempo controlled, the pedaling seamless. It was objectively a superior performance. But as Darius listened, he realized something. It was also cold. Technically perfect, but emotionally empty. Harrison played the notes Debussy had written without seeming to feel the longing they expressed, the moonlight-tinged melancholy that gave the piece its soul. When Harrison finished, he looked up at Darius with a slight smile. "That's how it should sound," he said. "Perhaps you could use that as a reference." Darius felt the intended sting, but he also felt something else. A strange kind of confidence. Because yes, Harrison played better technically, but Darius had played it more honestly. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered more. "I'll keep that in mind," Darius said carefully. After Harrison left, Thomas, who'd been standing in the hallway and had witnessed the exchange, came into the ballroom. "Don't let him get to you," he said. "He's trying to psych you out, make you doubt yourself." "Why would he do that?" Darius asked. "He's the main performer. I'm just the opening act." "Because you scare him," Thomas said bluntly. "Harrison Whitfield has built his career on being technically impeccable. He's played Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, all the prestigious venues. But you know what he's never been genuinely moving. He plays beautifully, but he doesn't make people feel. And I think on some level he knows it. So when he hears someone like you, someone who hasn't had his advantages, but who has something he lacks, it threatens him." Darius wasn't sure he believed that. Harrison Whitfield seemed far too successful and confident to feel threatened by a janitor. But Thomas's words stayed with him nonetheless. The final week before the gala, Darius barely slept. He'd practice at the estate, go home, lie in bed running through the pieces in his mind, then get up in the middle of the night to practice air piano on his kitchen table. His sister called to check on him, and he told her about the performance. She was thrilled, wanted to fly in to watch, but he talked her out of it. "If I crash and burn, I'd rather you not be there to see it," he joked. But there was real fear underneath. "You're not going to crash and burn," Keisha said firmly. "Darius, I remember when you used to play at church. I was just a kid, but I remember how everyone would stop talking when you started. How Mama would get this look on her face like she was watching a miracle. You have that gift. You've always had it. Don't you dare doubt yourself now." The night before the gala, Darius couldn't eat. He went to the ballroom for one final practice session, but his hands were shaking too badly to play well. He kept missing notes he'd nailed 100 times before stumbling through passages that should have been easy. "This is a mistake," he said aloud to the empty room. "I can't do this." But even as he said it, he knew he couldn't back out now. Too many people were counting on him. Mrs. Pemberton, who'd given him this chance. Thomas, who'd become an unexpected friend and mentor. His sister, his mother's memory, Catherine Pemberton's ghost, and himself. The 16-year-old kid, who'd given up everything, who'd been silent for so long, who deserved this one chance to be heard. Darius placed his hands on the keys one more time. He didn't play any of his prepared pieces. Instead, he played the first thing his mother had ever taught him. That simple C major progression. CFGC. The foundation of everything. And as he played it over and over, he felt some of the panic subside. This was what it all came back to. The basics. The pure love of making sound, of creating beauty. That had been enough when he was 6 years old. It had to be enough now. He went home. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing down on him. Tomorrow everything would change, one way or another. Either he'd prove that he deserved this second chance, or he'd confirm every doubt that had ever been expressed about people like him. People without proper training, without pedigree, without the right background. But at least he'd tried. After 27 years of silence, at least he'd let himself be heard. That would have to be enough. The day of the gala arrived bright and cold December in all its winter glory. Darius woke at dawn after maybe 2 hours of fitful sleep. His stomach was in knots, his hands were clammy, and his mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. He went through his morning routine mechanically. Shower, shave, dress in his regular clothes. He'd bring his performance outfit to the estate and change there. Mrs. Pemberton had insisted on having something made for him, a proper suit that actually fit. Darius had protested the expense, but she'd been immovable. "You're representing this estate," she'd said. "You'll dress appropriately." The suit was hanging in his closet, still in its garment bag. Darius had tried it on once when it was delivered and barely recognized himself. The man in the mirror looked successful, confident, like someone who belonged in elegant spaces. Not like a janitor. Not like someone who spent his days pushing a mop and his nights wondering if he'd make rent. Darius arrived at Bellwood Estate at 3 o'clock. The gala didn't start until 7, but he wanted time to practice to familiarize himself with the space as it would be tonight. Already the estate was a hive of activity. Caterers bustled in and out with equipment and supplies. Florists arranged elaborate displays. A crew was setting up additional lighting in the ballroom, making it shine even more brilliantly than usual. The piano had been moved slightly positioned where it would be most visible to arriving guests. It had been tuned that morning by Harrison's technician, and the sound was perfect now. Pure and resonant, every note singing exactly as it should. Darius sat at the piano and tried to practice, but he couldn't focus. People kept interrupting, asking him to move while they set up chairs or arranged tables. Finally, Thomas found him and led him to a small office away from the chaos. "Stay here until it's closer to time," Thomas advised. "You're just going to make yourself more nervous watching them set up. Try to rest. Read. Meditate. Whatever helps." Darius tried. He really did. But sitting still felt impossible. His leg bounced constantly. His mind wouldn't settle. He kept playing through the pieces mentally, and every time he'd find a spot where he might make a mistake, a passage where his fingers might freeze. At 6 o'clock, Thomas came to get him. "Time to get dressed," he said. "Guests will start arriving in an hour." The suit fit perfectly. Tailored charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, a crisp white shirt, a silver tie that caught the light. Black dress shoes that actually supported his feet instead of the cheap work boots he usually wore. Darius looked in the mirror and felt like an imposter. This wasn't him. This was some other person, someone who belonged in this world. "You look sharp," Thomas said, appearing in the doorway. "Really sharp. You'd never know you spent last night scrubbing floors." "I didn't," Darius pointed out. "That was Monday." Thomas grinned. "You know what I mean. You look like you belong here, like you were meant to be on that stage." Darius didn't feel like he belonged. He felt like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. But there was no more time to worry about it. Thomas led him back toward the ballroom where the final preparations were being completed. The transformation was stunning. The ballroom had always been beautiful, but now it was magnificent. Candles flickered on tables draped in white linen. The crystal chandeliers had been polished until they blazed with light. Flower arrangements, roses, lilies, orchids filled the air with fragrance. And in the center of it all, spotlit and gleaming, sat the Steinway grand piano. "Oh God," Darius breathed. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Mrs. Pemberton said, appearing beside him. She looked radiant in a floor-length emerald gown, diamonds at her throat and ears. "You absolutely can." "Absolutely. I've heard you play these pieces dozens of times. You know them cold." "I know them alone," Darius said. "With no one watching. This is different. All these people won't even be paying full attention at first," Mrs. Pemberton said practically. "They'll be arriving, greeting friends, getting drinks. Your background music until you make them pay attention. And you will make them pay attention. Because you're not playing for them. You're playing for yourself. For your mother. For everyone who told you that you couldn't." Darius took a deep breath. She was right. This wasn't about these wealthy strangers. This was about him. About proving to himself that he wasn't broken, that 27 years of silence hadn't killed what he once was. Guests began arriving at 7 sharp. Darius watched from the hallway as they filed in a steady stream of elegance and privilege. Women in gowns that cost more than his annual income. Men in tuxedos talking about business deals and vacation homes. They accepted champagne from servers. Air-kissed friends laughed with the easy confidence of people who'd never worried about anything substantial in their lives. And in 30 minutes, Darius was supposed to walk out there and play for them. Expose himself to their judgment, their dismissal, their potential mockery. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he thought he might pass out. His mouth was dry, and when he tried to swallow, nothing happened. "Mr. Coleman." A young server offered him a glass of water. "You look like you could use this." Darius took it gratefully, drank it in 3 gulps. "Thank you." "Are you the opening pianist?" the server asked. "Yeah." "I heard you practicing earlier this week. You're really good." She smiled. "My mom's a piano teacher. I grew up listening to her students play. You're better than any of them." It was a small thing, a casual compliment from a stranger, but somehow it helped. Reminded Darius that he wasn't just playing for the wealthy elite. He was playing for everyone in this room, the servers, the staff, the people who worked hard and dreamed big and deserved to witness something beautiful. At 7:25, Thomas found him. "It's time," he said quietly. "Mrs. Pemberton is going to introduce you. Are you ready?" "No, absolutely not. He would never be ready." "Yes," Darius said. They walked together to the edge of the ballroom. Darius could see Mrs. Pemberton moving toward the center of the room, catching people's attention. The conversations began to quiet. 200 faces turned toward her, curious and attentive. "Good evening, everyone." Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried beautifully across the space. "Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our annual charity gala. As always, the proceeds from this event will go toward the Children's Music Education Fund, providing instruments and lessons to underprivileged youth. It's a cause very dear to my heart." Polite applause. Before our main performance this evening by the acclaimed Harrison Whitfield, I'd like to introduce someone special. Mr. Darius Coleman has been working at our estate for several months. What I didn't know until recently is that Darius is also a tremendously gifted musician. When I discovered him playing Catherine's piano, she paused, her voice catching slightly. I knew that this instrument had found someone who could honor its legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Darius Coleman. The applause was polite, curious. Darius saw some confused looks. Whispers. A few people pulling out their phones to record what they probably assumed would be an interesting disaster. This was it. No more hiding. No more being invisible. Time to either fly or fall. Darius straightened his spine, lifted his chin, and walked into the ballroom toward the piano. Every eye was on him. Every person waiting to judge whether a janitor could possibly be worth their time. He reached the piano bench, sat down, adjusted his position slightly, placed his hands over the keys. And in that moment, something shifted. The nervousness didn't disappear. It was still there, a constant thrum under his skin. But it was joined by something else. Something fierce and determined and absolutely certain. He was Darius Coleman, son of Lorraine Coleman, taught by a woman who'd believed music was as essential as breathing, shaped by 27 years of struggle and survival. And he had every right to be here on this stage sharing the gift his mother had given him. He looked up at the audience one more time. His eyes found Mrs. Pemberton, who gave him an encouraging nod, found Thomas standing by the wall, who offered a small smile. And then Darius closed his eyes, took a breath, and let his fingers fall. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major drifted into the silence. The notes fell like drops of water into a still pool, each one creating ripples that spread through the ballroom. Darius kept his eyes closed for the opening phrase, letting muscle memory guide his fingers. The melody was achingly familiar, a lullaby his mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. The initial chatter of the room faded. Darius could feel the shift in attention, the way people who'd been half listening suddenly focused. This wasn't what they'd expected. Whatever they'd anticipated from the janitor at the piano, it wasn't this. Not this beauty, this tenderness, this honest vulnerability. Darius opened his eyes but didn't look at the audience. He looked at his hands, at the keys, at the way they came together to create something larger than either one alone. His mother's words came back to him. "You don't play for people, baby. You play through them. Let the music speak for itself." The nocturne built to its gentle climax, the cascade of notes that always sounded like tears falling. Darius poured everything into it, all the grief over his mother, all the years of suppressed longing, all the dreams he'd thought were dead. And then the resolution, the return to the opening theme, but different now, changed by the journey. As the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence, then applause, genuine and warm. Not the polite clapping from before, but real appreciation. Darius could hear the surprise in it, the reassessment happening in real time. He didn't pause, didn't give them time to process or talk. He moved immediately into Clair de Lune. And this was different from the Chopin. Where the nocturne had been intimate and personal, Debussy was atmospheric, impressionistic, music that painted pictures in sound. Darius let himself sink into it, let the familiar harmonies wash over him. He thought about moonlight on water, about beauty that exists for its own sake, about moments of peace in a chaotic world. His fingers moved with more confidence now, the initial nerves burning away in the heat of performance. He could feel the room responding. The conversations had stopped completely. Even the servers had paused in their duties, standing still to listen. This was what live music could do, Darius realized. It could stop time. It could make 200 strangers from different worlds all feel the same thing at the same moment. Clair de Lune ended with its characteristic fade, the notes trailing off like moonlight disappearing behind clouds. This time, the applause was louder, more enthusiastic. Darius heard someone say, "My God, who is this guy?" But he couldn't think about that now. He had to focus. The next piece was the hardest, the one he'd almost cut from the program. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement. Fast, furious, technically unforgiving. This was the moment of truth. Either he could do this, or he couldn't. Darius placed his hands in position, took a breath, and launched into the opening arpeggios. The music exploded from the piano. This wasn't gentle or atmospheric. This was passionate, desperate, urgent. The right hand flew across the keys in rapid-fire patterns, while the left provided thundering bass notes. Beethoven wrote this movement to sound like barely controlled chaos, and that's exactly what Darius gave them. His fingers were a blur. His whole body was engaged now, leaning into the harder passages, pulling back for the brief moments of respite. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His heart raced. But his hands knew what to do. They'd practiced this passage thousands of times in the last 12 weeks, and now they executed it with something close to perfection. There was a tricky section in the middle, a place where the hands crossed and the rhythm could easily falter. Darius had messed this up more times than he could count. But not tonight. Tonight his fingers found every note, hit every rhythm, and the music surged forward without stumbling. The final section built to a climax, the fastest and most technically demanding part of the piece. This was where Darius usually made his mistakes, where his fingers would trip over each other or hit wrong notes. But tonight, powered by adrenaline and determination and the pure refusal to fail in front of these people, he nailed it. The final chord rang out aggressive and triumphant. Darius's hands came down hard on the keys, and the sound filled the ballroom like a declaration. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People stood. Not everyone, but many of them. Darius heard whoops, actual whoops, from somewhere in the back of the room. He looked up for the first time since he'd started playing, and the expressions he saw shocked him. These people, these wealthy, sophisticated people who'd probably heard hundreds of professional performances, were genuinely moved. Mrs. Pemberton was standing near the front, her hands clasped to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Thomas was grinning like a proud parent. And throughout the room, people were turning to each other, talking animatedly, gesturing toward the piano. But Darius had one more piece. The hardest one. The one that meant the most. He held up his hand, asking for quiet. The room settled. And then he began the revolutionary Etude. Chopin wrote this piece in a fury in response to political upheaval in his homeland. It sounds like anger and defiance and determination not to be silenced. It sounds like someone fighting against forces larger than themselves and refusing to give up. It sounds to Darius like his life. The opening is dramatic, urgent octaves in the left hand, supporting a melody that soars and dives in the right. Darius attacked it with everything he had. This wasn't just notes anymore. This was his story. Every difficult passage was another obstacle he'd overcome. Every triumphant phrase was another moment when he'd refused to quit. He thought about his mother working 2 jobs and still finding time to teach him piano. He thought about 16-year-old Darius dropping out of school to raise his sister. He thought about all the jobs he'd worked, all the times he'd been invisible, all the years he'd been silent. And he channeled all of it into the music. The anger at a world that valued pedigree over talent. The grief over lost years and lost dreams. But also the hope. The stubborn, irrepressible hope that it wasn't too late, that lives could be reclaimed, that voices silenced could speak again. The piece built to its furious climax, and Darius's hands flew across the keyboard. He was vaguely aware that something extraordinary was happening, that this performance had transcended mere competence and become something else, something raw and real and undeniable. The final passage was coming, the cascade of notes that led to the decisive ending. Darius's muscles were screaming, his lungs were burning, but he couldn't stop now. Wouldn't stop now. He pushed through, giving every last bit of energy he had. And then the final chord. Powerful, definitive, unmistakable. Darius's hands came down on the keys and held there, letting the sound ring out, filling every corner of the ballroom. And in that moment, in the space between the last note and the response that would follow, Darius felt something he hadn't felt in 27 years. Complete. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the ballroom erupted. The standing ovation was universal this time. Everyone on their feet, applauding wildly. People were shouting, "Bravo!" Someone was crying. The servers were clapping. Even the caterers had emerged from the kitchen to see what was happening. Darius sat there, stunned. His hands were still on the keys, trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. He couldn't quite process what had just happened. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. And not just done it, he'd succeeded beyond what he'd imagined possible. Mrs. Pemberton was pushing through the crowd toward him, still crying. She reached the piano and took his hands in hers. "That was magnificent," she said, her voice breaking. "That was everything I knew you could be. Everything Catherine would have wanted for this piano." Thomas was there too, gripping Darius's shoulder, not trusting himself to speak. But then someone else approached. Harrison Whitfield, the professional pianist who was supposed to be the star of the evening, who now looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Harrison stopped in front of the piano. The room quieted, everyone curious about what the famous pianist would say about the janitor who'd just stolen his spotlight. "Mr. Coleman," Harrison said, and his voice was different than before. Humbler, genuine. "I owe you an apology. When we first met, I was dismissive. I judged you based on your background instead of your talent. That was wrong of me." He extended his hand. Darius shook it, too overwhelmed to speak. "What I heard tonight," Harrison continued, "wasn't just technical skill, though your technique was impressive, especially for someone self-taught. What I heard was something I've been chasing my entire career and rarely find: authenticity, truth, music that comes from a real place that means something beyond just notes on a page. You played tonight like someone who had to play like it was necessary for survival. And that's what real artistry sounds like." The room was silent, everyone listening. "I've played Carnegie Hall," Harrison said. "I've performed for presidents and dignitaries. I've won competitions and received accolades, but tonight you showed me what I've been missing. You showed me what it sounds like when someone plays from their soul rather than their training. So thank you. Thank you for the reminder of why we do this, why music matters." Harrison stepped back, and the applause started again. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like acceptance, like validation, like these people so different from Darius in every way recognized him as someone real, someone valuable, someone worth listening to. Darius looked out at the sea of faces all focused on him, and for the first time in his adult life, he wasn't invisible. He was seen. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. After the performance, Darius found himself surrounded by people wanting to talk to him, to shake his hand, to tell him how moved they'd been. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. A woman in her 60s, dripping with jewelry, gripped his arm and said, "Young man, my father was a musician, a jazz pianist. He never made much money, never got famous, but he played with such joy. You reminded me of him tonight, the way you lost yourself in the music. Thank you for that memory." A younger man, probably in his 30s, approached more hesitantly. "I used to play piano," he said quietly. "Took lessons for years, but I stopped when I went to college, got busy with work. Hearing you tonight, I think I need to start again. Need to find that part of myself I gave up." Over and over, people shared their stories, their own abandoned dreams, their connections to music, their appreciation for what Darius had done. He listened to each one, humbled by the realization that his performance had touched something universal. The yearning for beauty, for meaning, for connection to something larger than daily life. Mrs. Pemberton eventually rescued him, leading him to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "You need a break," she said. "You've earned it." Harrison Whitfield's performance followed later in the evening. It was technically perfect as expected. Beautiful, accomplished, precise. And Darius could appreciate it for what it was. But he could also hear what Harrison himself had admitted, the lack of that raw emotion, that sense of necessity. Harrison played because he was skilled. Darius played because he had to. After the gala ended, and the last guests had departed, Darius found himself alone in the ballroom once more. The decorations were being taken down around him, the magic of the evening slowly dismantled. But the piano remained, and so did Darius. He sat at the bench one more time in his rumpled tuxedo that no longer felt foreign on his body. He played softly, just for himself. No audience, no pressure. Just a man and an instrument having a quiet conversation. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway. She'd changed into simpler clothes and looked tired but happy. "You're still here," she said. "I wanted a moment," Darius said, "to process everything." She came and sat beside him on the bench, something Darius never would have imagined 3 months ago. "You changed a lot of minds tonight," she said, "including, I think, your own." Darius nodded. "I spent so long telling myself I wasn't a musician anymore, that I'd given that up, that it was in the past. But tonight I realized, you don't stop being what you are. You might suppress it, hide it, ignore it, but it doesn't go away." "No," Mrs. Pemberton agreed. "It doesn't." She paused, then continued. "I have a proposition for you. Several people tonight asked about taking lessons with you. Wealthy people who can pay very well. I was thinking, what if we converted one of the unused rooms here into a proper teaching studio? You could give lessons work with advanced students, make a real living from music." Darius stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely. You'd need to get certified, take some pedagogy courses probably, but you have the talent, and more importantly, you have the passion. You could teach people not just technique, but what music really means, what it's for." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Mrs. Pemberton said. "You don't have to decide tonight. But Darius, you've been given a second chance. Don't waste it. Don't go back to being invisible when you've shown everyone, including yourself, what you're capable of." After Mrs. Pemberton left, Darius sat at the piano for another hour. He thought about his mother, wondered what she'd think of this night. He imagined her in the audience watching him play, crying with pride. "You did it, baby," he could almost hear her say. "You found your way back." He thought about his sister, about the sacrifices he'd made to give her a future. Those sacrifices had mattered. They'd been worth it. But maybe now, it was time to build his own future too. Maybe it was possible to do both, to have been the person who survived and to become the person who thrived. He thought about all the other people out there like him. People who'd put their dreams on hold for practical reasons. People who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't trained enough, weren't the right kind of person to deserve success. And he hoped that maybe somehow his story would give them permission to try again. Before he left that night, Darius played one more piece. Not part of his planned program, not something he'd practiced extensively. His mother's favorite hymn, the one she'd played in church every Sunday. "Great is thy faithfulness." He played it simply, without embellishment, the way she used to. And as he played, he felt her presence there with him. Felt her hand on his shoulder, the way she used to rest it when he was young. Felt her pride and love and eternal belief that he was meant for something more than the world had initially offered him. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered when the last note faded. "For everything." 6 months later, the teaching studio at Bellwood Estate was thriving. Darius had 8 regular students, ranging from advanced teenagers to adults who were rediscovering music after years away. He'd quit his security guard job and reduced his janitorial duties to just 1 night a week, something he insisted on keeping, partly because he needed the humility, partly because he'd come to like the quiet hours in the estate. But mostly, he taught, and he loved it. Loved passing on what his mother had taught him, not just the technical skills, but the philosophy behind it. That music was for everyone. That talent mattered less than dedication. That beauty could be created anywhere by anyone if they cared enough to try. One afternoon, as he was finishing a lesson with a teenage girl who reminded him of himself at that age, hungry for something beyond what daily life offered, Mrs. Pemberton came to the studio door. "Darius, do you have a minute? There's someone here who wants to meet you." Curious Darius followed her to the ballroom. Standing by the piano was a woman in her 40s, well-dressed, but with an air of nervousness about her. Next to her was a boy, maybe 10 years old, black with wide eyes that kept darting to the piano. "Mr. Coleman," Mrs. Pemberton said, "this is Sandra Watkins and her son Marcus. Sandra saw the video of your performance. Someone posted it online, and it's gotten over 2 million views now." Darius blinked. He hadn't known there was a video, hadn't known people were watching it. "Mr. Coleman," Sandra said, her voice emotional. "My son has been begging for piano lessons for 2 years, but we couldn't afford them. I work 2 jobs as it is. When I saw you play, when I learned your story, I thought, maybe you'd understand. Maybe you'd consider taking him on even if we can't pay full price." Darius looked at the boy, saw himself in those eager eyes, saw the hunger for something beautiful, something meaningful, something that would make life worth more than just survival. "How about free?" Darius said. "I'll teach him for free. And if he has friends who want to learn, I'll teach them too. Kids who can't otherwise afford it." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," Darius said. "I'm offering. Someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it, when there was no logical reason to invest in me. Now I get to pass that forward." He knelt down to the boy's level. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus," the boy whispered. "Marcus, have you ever touched a piano before?" Marcus shook his head. "Then let's fix that right now." Darius stood and gestured to the Steinway. "Come on, I'll show you where we start. Middle C. Right here in the middle. Everything else comes from this." As Marcus tentatively approached the piano, as his small fingers reached for the keys, as that first pure note rang out in the ballroom, Darius felt time fold in on itself. He was simultaneously here now, a teacher passing on knowledge, and back in his childhood, his mother's hand guiding his own, starting him on the journey that would define his life. The circle was complete. The music that had saved him was now his to share. And in sharing it, he was honoring everyone who'd believed in him. His mother, Mrs. Pemberton, even his younger self, who'd never quite given up hope that someday, somehow, he'd find his way back to the piano. "That's it," Darius said softly, as Marcus pressed the key again, this time with more confidence. "That's perfect. Now let's see what else you can do." And in that moment, in a ballroom, in a mansion where Darius had once been invisible, teaching a boy who'd almost been denied his chance at beauty, Darius Coleman felt something he'd searched for his entire adult life. Peace. Purpose. Home. The music played on.